Hello guys, today we're going to talk about imperialism, what is imperialism, and what it means in the context of the industrialized world after the revolutionary period. So imperialism is not a new concept at this time. The definition for imperialism has to do with extending a nation's power over other lands. So we've seen that happen before. For example, Great Britain or France in the New World, extending parts of their government into that new territory. And so that has happened within Europe as well prior to this time. But with the introduction of an industrial economy and some changes in the way that governments and economies are functioning, we see a different approach to imperialism, and it becomes known as new imperialism. Again, because the concept is not new, but now it's happening in a different world, in this industrialized world. So we call it new imperialism. Western expansion, so what is now the United States by this time in history and parts of Western Europe, begin to expand their territory in huge amounts during this time. They move into parts of Asia, huge parts of Africa, and also Latin America. And there are many countries involved, again, including the United States and many European countries. We're going to mostly look at the European countries when we talk about imperialism for this class. There's several reasons why imperialism gains speed during this time. As I just mentioned, it's largely tied to industrialization. You know from industrialization that there is now a greater demand for resources, natural resources, to create products, as well as the need for a growing market. And so by expanding your power into another region, you not only gain control over the resources that are available, but also just the population that you have available to trade with. You need to get stuff to make stuff, and then you need to be able to sell your stuff to people. And so by having power over other regions outside just your country, it gives you an advantage in resources and markets. So that's a huge economic draw during this time. One of the things that we saw with early imperialism, early colonization, was, and it varies from country to country, but that a lot of countries were not so concerned about necessarily direct control, but rather having sort of opportunities, maybe to trade or to, settle. But again, with this new imperialism, it becomes a much more demanding need. And so countries now are more aggressively seeking control over the territories, not just, as we saw with the French in the United States, not just maybe establishing a small trading post, but rather controlling the whole government, the whole economy, the goods, and the people. Another reason for expansion during this time has to do with power. And that's tied into the economy as well, of course, power and money. But because all of these Western nations are beginning to industrialize, they're growing in their wealth, they're reaching out and looking for new resources, the power struggle becomes even greater between nations. And it becomes almost a status symbol, right, of who is able to acquire more land, more population, more resources, because that ties into the wealth and the economy, but also, again, just the prestige of acquiring additional land. And we start to see some of these big Western powers, again, in some cases the United States, but also Great Britain, France, Germany, attempting to expand their their presence for just the reasons of establishing power and establishing, again, prestige. So that's a second reason. So we have the economy, money, industrialization as a big push. Also, the need to establish dominant power. Another idea that comes about during this time, unfortunately growing on some earlier ideas, is the concept of social Darwinism. Charles Darwin, scientist, through his studies, establishes the scientific theory of evolution and the concept of survival of the fittest. And Charles Darwin is around during this time. He is writing about these ideas. People are reading about these ideas. And unfortunately, what happens is many Europeans, especially Westerners, apply his ideas of survival of the fittest to groups, to societies. And so we see, unfortunately, also a huge racist motivation for imperialism as well. Social Darwinism, again, not the scientific study of Darwin and his theories on evolution, but social Darwinism argues that certain groups of people, certain races, certain ethnicities are more fit than others, and applies that argument of survival of the fittest to justify superiority in their minds over other groups. And so for a lot of leaders, this becomes, again, a motivation for, or maybe a justification for their imperialist movements, right? Especially in some industrialized places, this attitude of we are ahead and we are better, therefore we have the right, and in some cases the obligation, to go in and take over these other regions. And so, again, there's a lot of racist motivations behind the imperialist push. Tied in with that, again, their argument and their justification is that, when many times conflict arises as a result of these attempts to take land, the argument is that the more fit group wins and therefore is allowed to have power over the other group. We also see the argument for bringing civilization to groups that in the eyes of Europeans are perhaps not equal to them. And so we see a lot of religious motivations and religious groups, religious travelers and teachers traveling into these other parts of the world as part of the imperialist movement to teach, to civilize the groups. And when they say that, they're talking about converting them to Christianity, especially when we see movement into parts of Asia and parts of Africa where the spiritual and the religious beliefs don't look the same way they do in Europe. Then the argument becomes that those people need to be saved. And so we have an obligation. Many leaders believe they have an obligation to convert the people of these areas to the religious system that is followed in their country. So several reasons why imperialism happens, several reasons why it is justified in the eyes of those leaders moving into these other parts of the world, and several repercussions. And in some cases, we see quick repercussions, immediate conflict. In some cases, the attempt to take territory is not successful, although in many cases it is, and oftentimes for really extended periods of time, even into what we would consider very modern times. So later on, we'll look at some examples in different regions of the world of what imperialism looks like, who it involves, and what the results are. Thanks for watching. Bye.